Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM. This is episode number 2. We're going to be talking today about a power vacuum encounter. We're going to be talking about a bitter artist NPC, but we're also going to be talking about how Matthew got his start and what kinds of games he runs here on Rise of the GM. Thanks for joining us. Here again with Adam today. Adam, good to see you. How are you today?
Doing okay. How about you?
All is well. All is well. We are, by the way, audience, we are trying to get our audio stuff figured out. So if anything sounds weird, like if I'm way too loud, because right now in my headphones I sound pretty loud, let us know in the comments. Hey, Matthew seemed kind of loud. Last week we felt like Adam was kind of loud. We tried to tone that down. Hopefully we didn't go too far. Let us know if you hear anything that could be changed. But today we're excited because we got another encounter starter for you. We're going to touch on in a moment. We got an NPC that you can maybe throw into your game, but we're also going to do a little talking about how I got my start. I don't think there's anything before. Let's just jump into this encounter starter. Usually I'm used to I also do a football podcast. If any of you are football fans, you can check out the Football Fandemic. And I usually start with news. And maybe that's something we're going to have to look at, what kind of RPG news is going on in the world, because it's always a nice way to start. But we're going to start today with an encounter starter. Again, we like to kind of we have this book that we're kind of working through here called Eureka. And it's 501 different kind of encounter starters to inspire your games. And this is by Gnome Stew. They do a podcast called Gnomecast. Check them out if you haven't. But we like to kind of throw this out and then talk about how we would use this little encounter starter, just so that you guys as GMs who are starting can start to say, okay, if I read something, how do these guys do it? And then how does that translate to me throwing something like that in a game and getting it so that it fits? So we'll start here. I'm just going to kind of read/summarize this, and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So this one is called Power Vacuum. And you have these heroes who are in some remote town, and there's a threat. There's monsters or bandits or something that comes up against this town, and our PCs fight them off. Okay, so that just happened, and maybe you would kind of find a town you're already in that had a threat, and you would then drop this kind of scenario into that town. So your PCs just beat something, and then they depart. Okay, so you know how PCs are always like taking off and traveling. As they travel, that's where you put this in. They're traveling and they meet a man on the road who's heading to the little town or city or village or whatever that they just left, that they just defeated this threat. And as they do, they meet this man, and they strike up a conversation while they're camping beside the road or just walking on the road, and they stop to talk, and they find out that this guy's a mercenary who heard there was trouble in this town. So whatever it was that you guys just defeated, he had heard about that somehow, and he was coming to see if he could help. You guys, assure him that's taken care of. We took care of it. But hey, it was, it's a nice little town. You can go check it out. So the PCs go on. He goes on in the town. And then weeks later, after completing whatever it is they went to do, they're coming back by way of this town. And that's always a fun thing, to stop and revisit places that you've been, because then there gets to be a little bit of history in the story. So they're coming back after this, and as they get near this town, they're confronted by a group of people who demand that they pay tribute, that there is a highway tax now imposed by the warlord of the area. And you guys are, your PCs are like, what warlord are you talking about? Come to find out that this warlord is the mercenary who was going into that town, that when he went into the town, before the heroes even get to come and confront this guy, they find out that there was this threat that they vanquished was really only like the advanced guard of some greater threat or a further threat from these monsters or from these bandits or whatever. And that this mercenary went in and kind of, for the protection of the town, they turned to him, and he set things up and got it so that they were protected. But when he did, he kind of began to take over the town. And as you guys encounter him, he thanks you guys for creating this situation where he became this warlord. And as you observe him, you find out that he kind of rules with a heavy hand. He's filling his own coffers, skimming off the top, and generally making the town suffer under his rule. The town, you can see, is dying under his hand. And so the heroes have to decide how they're going to deal with this warlord and deliver this town that basically got him because of something they did, right? So they kind of just beat the first one. They told this guy where it was, and now indirectly he's kind of ruining this city. So that decision comes up. But before you get a chance to like make that decision, there's another onslaught from whatever this threat is, whatever these monsters are. And it's probably one as a GM that you make that's a little too tough for your characters to handle on their own. And so now they have this decision. Do they work with this guy? And then if they do work with this guy, what's the aftermath of that look like? And so this all becomes part of the decision process. And yeah, so it's really good, one, to create some continuity, to give some history. And it creates this sense of cause and effect for your players, that the things they do in the world matter and make a difference. And then they have to make a decision on this. And so it's important to make the first conversation with that mercenary memorable. You want to give him good character so that they immediately, upon coming back, they know who this guy is and what's going on. So that's the basic gist of it. Okay. There's a lot you can add to that you can flesh out to that. What kinds of things would you start to do, Adam? You're in a campaign. You're kind of like wanting to make sure you have an encounter idea. You were just fighting some monsters, and then you read this. You're like, oh, that's a good idea because I know they're going to move on, but this will give them something to come back to that might be really interesting. What would you do?
Right. Yeah. I love just the setup of that, like this idea of, it being you're passing through this thing, there's something that's happened. You've taken care of, the threat, like it said, and then moved on, and being able, like you said, to come back to a place that maybe you have built some relationships. Like there are other NPCs there, you've done things there, you've experienced places and all of this. And to be able to come back to like a change like this, I think is interesting. I look at the mercenary or the warlord, and I would really want to lean heavily into like ways for them not to like immediately go like murder hobo and we're just going to kill this person and like like you obviously, if that's the way they go, again, that's the way players can go, and that was a story. But I do think there's something about like, okay, we're not going to immediately try to fix this with just going in and murdering this person who does have strong people around them as well. But even, in that like initial conversation, like you said, meet them around the campfire on the road, maybe share a camp for the night, or those kind of things, even being like a budding friendship, kind of happened there, where there was some mutual respect between the groups, so that when they come into this place and realize, hey, this is a person, well, that we know, there can be some kind of conversation, at least like, well, let's approach this person and see. And like it said in that prompt, it's like the warlord is thankful to the PCs, like consequences. That's like a really great thing to consider anytime we're doing anything. Is, I think about, we brought up the campaign that we're in the middle of now. It's like there are choices you make. If you choose to not do something and walk away and go do something else, then for that to continue moving forward, not just come to a standstill because the PCs didn't interact with it. That's more like video game stuff, where it's like, oh, here's 2 missions. You took one, you can come back to this one later. It's still going to be there. I think it's really important in this kind of case that like the world moves forward if they're not engaged, even if they're not engaging with it, kind of thing. So, feel like I went off on a tangent there.
Yeah,
Didn't even
no.
answer your question, but those are the things I'm like thinking of with this.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think, you obviously had just set up some sort of encounter where there's some monsters of some sort or bandits or whatever it is. And I like the idea that you like defeat them and you think, okay, we did this for you. The town,
Yeah.
you're welcome. We're moving on, sort of thing. But then you got to think about when they come back, how's it going to be like greater? Because there is this sense that, this was not the main force. This was
Right.
the small. And this now looks like something that might be too much for us to handle without this guy. I like that dynamic. But then you have to think, okay, how am I going to take those monsters that we fought before and make it harder?
Right.
Is that
Right.
bigger? Is it more? Is it them combined with? And so it gives you a chance to kind of think in that direction as you're thinking about your monsters. But then also, it's doubtful that he has had the success he's had just because he's one mercenary. So you have to
Right.
start thinking, okay, who are his allies now? Did he come in and like organize people in the town that you dismissed or just said, hey, we'll take care of this, who may have regretted you kind of taking all the glory? Who are these people now that keep him ruling with an iron hand? Because you don't do that by yourself. If people are
Right.
getting tired of it and you're just one guy, you're not going to last long. Somebody's going to slip a dagger in your ribs and you're done. But he's evidently set up some sort of structure. Did he do that within the town, or did he call in some of his friends,
Right.
some other mercenaries? How did this come to this situation? And so, and I like you said, that idea that, and I've said it before, I don't think it's ever great to make like, and I've seen people do this where it's like all the baddies are bad. It's obvious this is a bad guy, and your PC characters pick up really quick when you just haven't fleshed out much beyond they're
Right.
bad and they're an obstacle. They want to kill them right away.
Yeah.
But when you like begin to play on those tug on those strings of like, this is something you liked about that guy. Maybe when you were talking to him, something happens and you kind of respect something from his past. And when you meet him in town, he's like super gregarious. And like, again, it says he's thankful and maybe he invites you in. And
Right.
at first, it almost seems like everything's okay. But then you start to get these sidelong glances from people in the town and you begin to see the places where he's got corruption. But at the same time, he's being nice and talking about how he's protecting this town because he cares about it. And so it becomes a harder decision than just like, well, he's the bad guy. Let's get him.
Right. Right.
And then of course you have to decide, are we going to join with him for this battle and then turn on him? What's that say about us? Or are we going to like try and take these guys by ourselves and him at the same time? Can we even do that? I think
Right.
setting up those sorts of things make it really, really interesting and fun. And so one of the things I like to do with any campaign I'm in, and this will probably come up again and again, I do the what ifs in my journal. I journal a lot. I write, and this is the way I come up with ideas. I'm like, what if this guy ends up being, so-and-so's brother? Okay, that's a dumb idea. Scratch. What if this guy ends up, or, maybe I think, well, I write that and I'm like, oh, whoa, that's a great thing. What if he did end up being somebody's brother? And then I let my mind run. Or what if this guy ends up saying, oh, okay, you don't want me here? You guys handle this yourself. And he refuses to fight. And, what if you lose somebody because of that? Or, I try to think through some creative things that would really make this story more interesting. And
Yeah.
I would encourage as a GM, don't just decide this is what I'm going to do like right away. Sit down and take a moment. You take an encounter like this and do your what ifs. Just write a bunch of questions. What if this happened? What if this? Oh, what if this, townsperson is the one who really turns out to be against you because of what you did earlier, and he's the one who propped this guy up, and
Yeah.
and what if, and let that go into the rest of your campaign.
Right. Yeah. I really like the tie-in of like NPCs that you have dealt with prior that you're bringing up with that. Cause like you said, this guy alone likely isn't going to just overrun a village or a town. There are these people around them, and being able to bring in, I think that does like populate things more and remind people more of, this PC was kind of a jerk to this person, and now they're the right hand man of the mercenary, or on the flip side, it's like maybe people that you've engaged with, and I don't know, the shopkeeper that you've done a bunch of buying and selling with, who is friendly, and or this person that you saved from the threat earlier, who you had a meal with their family after that happened. Those people even being like, you like kind of laying the guilt trip in some ways, but like you left us to this, you like, if you would have been here, those kind of things. I think you can even push the emotion a little bit with some of those conversations, and again, that's making more depth to the village, the town, just the world for people, that it's not just a bunch of static people standing there waiting until you approach them, kind of thing. So I really like, I like this idea, but I really like what it means as far as just the continuity of a game, being a thing that you see a little bit better with it. So
one thing I'll say too, as we talk about all these encounter starters, these ideas that when you're kind of like, oh, where am I going? So generally when you sit down as a GM, you have some sort of vague, it may not be totally fleshed out, vague idea of the overall arc of the campaign, right? You know who, you know what the kind of end is going to look like, or I would hope, not everybody does this, but it's a good idea to have an idea. When all this is wrapped up and said and done, what is the thing that's going to make them feel like they accomplished the goal? Because at least for me, when I'm doing the epic stuff, that's always going to be in my mind. Again, it doesn't have to. I know people who do campaigns where it's just like string of pearls. It's like, here's an encounter, and then here's another encounter of the same size, and they get a little stronger, but it's just still the same kind of encounter, and you're just going to do that until we get tired of playing this game. Okay, that might be something you do. But if you have this idea, this arc, a good idea when you're getting all these little encounters is to, one, be careful not to make too many threads, okay? Too many loose ends that at the end you can't figure out how to tie them all up, because you've made like so many different bad guys and you can't figure out how it all fits together. But two, and kind of in keeping with that, think about this in terms of your overall goal. Let's say your overall goal is the king is trying to, I don't know, steal power from his son, who was going to marry another kingdom, but the only way he could think to do it was, I'm like running into the because I'm making stuff up here as I go, but it had something to do with his son and his other son, who was illegitimate, that he wanted in his place. Okay, let's say that's the way it's good. That's the end. As you read this one, you might think, okay, what if? I'm a big fan of the what if. What if this mercenary was the king's illegitimate son that is out right now and nobody knows, and they're going to have to face him again later. Maybe I don't want him to like have a confrontation where they kill him right now. He acquiesces at the end and like says, I'll leave or whatever, but there's bad blood between them or whatever. How can you work this into the final story? And so to sit down and think about, like, I know what I want my final and some of the characters to be. This guy is an unnamed guy. Could he be any of those people? And like really begin to develop, because it gives him more history and more substance when you've had different kinds of encounters with him throughout. So just a little thing I would do, again, if I were just dropping this into my campaign. I would think, how does it fit the overall campaign?
For sure. Yeah, I think that's really good. The not having too many threads is really important, and I've definitely fallen into that at times, where it's like there's so many, and it's because it's interesting. I do think sometimes like it's fine for some things to just never have an answer. That's as long as they're not too big. I think that can be unfulfilling, but I'd rather have things not get wrapped than do what I have done, thinking like early games where it's like everything has to come to this point at the end. And it's like, well, these things are kind of being strong-armed into a mold where they could have just been left alone.
And the cool thing about that, the cool thing about leaving some things. I've met a guy recently who he is like a master at this. He has multiple campaigns and he ties them together.
Mhm.
And so it's cool. Like his character from one game, that he played earlier has interacted with this character. And so like you leave something untied, that can be the basis for a whole nother campaign that takes off, or like visit in another campaign just for all your players to be like, oh my goodness, that was so and so. We saw him back in, that's kind of fun too.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's cool. I've been thinking about this thing kind of in the midst of that, of like this warlord, and so I just finished for like the umpteenth time Lord of the Rings, reading it with the kids, and it's like a yearly read, and that's who I am. But
that's who he is.
That's who it really is. But there's hopefully this isn't spoiler for, it's like been that many years.
If you haven't read the Lord of the Rings by now, you're okay to be spoiled. I'm just going to say it.
It's been 40 years, more than that. But where am I going? Oh, it's at the end. There's the Shire has been kind of ravaged by evil, also of a lesser but still horrible sort. And there's this moment where they're kind of working their way to the center, back to the start at Bag End, and they're going to confront the kind of person who's been in charge, and they find out that person actually has been kind of supplanted by a person who's really in charge and who's been pulling the strings the whole time. But then even when that's kind of dealt with, there's a situation but there's still like this person's followers out in the region that have like little kind of their own little posses of people that have banded together and are still causing problems and stuff. And, this is kind of a long-winded way of saying this, but I think even this opens up a longer thread of, maybe the PCs do have a call to action of, we're not just going to deal with this big threat that's been constantly coming after this village. We're not just going to deal with this warlord, but there's some like ramifications of it even in the country surrounding this that we have to deal with if we're going to leave these people in a good place, kind of thing. So I think there's lots of, it's either you can kind of end it there. Any of these, I'm sure you can do that with, but this one feels like it has more breadth to it as far as being able to even spin some things out of it. And so I appreciate that about this prompt. I think it's good, and have enjoyed looking at this one.
Very good. Well, we hope this one helps you guys. Yeah. And if not this one, again, there's a book of 501 of these. Right. Find that book, Eureka, and read through some of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of shifting gears a little bit from the encounter, this like kind of main topic of today that, I wanted to talk through a little bit is just like looking at Matthew's background. I'm going to talk about my background next week. We want, you all to just kind of get to know us and kind of where we're coming from as far as our game history. We talked a little bit last week, into that, but it was pretty abbreviated. So just taking a few, this one to talk about Matthew's background, next week to talk about mine, to just kind of see where we've kind of come from as we've led up to this point. So, Matthew is, I kind of just want to open it up to you to do that. I may have some like leading questions, but you talked last week about, like you and your friend Pat would talk about these characters, and I don't want to step on that, but were there any like interactions with gaming, with tabletop gaming prior to even that moment for you? Or like, what was the first kind of touch point you had with D&D or like other role-playing games?
I'd have to say it was my friend Pat. Before that, so when I was young, I picked up, I forget what the very first series was. I think it was Piers Anthony, the Blue Adept series. And I really found like that's kind of a sci-fi fantasy mix. Mm. But anyway, I got really into like reading and it wasn't until I met Pat that there was this idea that you could kind of create your own characters. And it was kind of like that, beginning to write your own story, which is what so many gamers, I think, do. They love the idea of creating a story together. And so we would sit and write characters. And often it was, we just had like the player's handbook. And, we had the list of these. I think this was 2.0.
Okay. Yeah,
maybe what we had.
Yeah.
I can't even remember, but it had a list of, classes and races. And so for us, it was just fun to imagine, okay, what if I was this race in this class?
Right.
And then we think about like the books that we read where there was like a hero and what would we want that to look like? And so he really got into writing these backstories and then never playing the characters. And I said that last week. But then at some point, a guy came along. I went to Purdue University, and this was in my college days. A guy came along who said, "Hey, you guys want to try play D&D?" And first of all, I didn't know anybody had ever played this. I'm like, "Oh, I guess so. Yeah, I make these characters." And so we went, and of course, I went with I played a lot of different musical instruments. Played, in some bands, whatever. Who hasn't? But of course, I picked a bard because I thought, guys who do music are cool, right? And so the very first time I ever played D&D, whatever it was, 2.0, I think, I went as a bard, and I can't even remember. It's probably an elf, bard elf, because I thought that was cool. And here's what happened. We went, and our first encounter was we fought this bush. Okay, there was a living bush that would smack you with its. I don't even remember why we were riding on the road. I'm playing my pan flute, and of course, being the guy I am, I actually had a pan flute, a little flute at the table that I annoyed everybody to death with by playing it. And we came on this first fight. It was supposed to be an easy one, but of course, you start level 1 at like 5 or 6 hit points. You just don't have much. And you think in your mind, you've been writing these backstories about like, I'm so awesome. And so you get this feeling that it's going to be like that. And so I went up against this bush. I got knocked off of my horse. It did damage. And when I fell, it did damage. And I was killed. My very first encounter by a bush. Wow. I don't remember, but I think everybody at the table was killed.
Oh,
Total party kill by this bush. Okay, that could have something to do with being a GM. The guy who was doing it had not run a lot of games, and so he ran this game, and maybe that bush was a little more powerful than he expected or something. And I just remember leaving that game thinking, D&D's not that fun. I thought I had this great character, and I get killed by a bush. That's stupid. Yeah. And so then I didn't play again. He never ran another game. None of us knew anything about GMing. We just didn't have any experience with it. And so nothing happened until I got out of my bachelor's degree, out of my master's degree. I taught at Purdue for 8 years, and I did other stuff. And then I finally ended up moving over to Illinois. And that's when Adam, our great co-host here, said, "Hey, me and some guys get together and play a game every week. You want to come?" I had no idea what they were talking about. You didn't really make it clear when you asked me.
I forgot that.
And so I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure." And so we went over to this guy, Danny Brown's house, and they're playing something called Warriors of Virtue. And I know Adam can tell you more about this next week when he talks about kind of his background. I had never heard of this, and there's a good reason, and that's because it didn't really exist except in these guys' minds. But like Danny and Eric and one of the, I forget who the other guy was.
Zach played for a while too.
Zach and Tolbert. Wasn't there? Anyway, so there were some guys who wanted to play D&D, but their parents, being good Christian parents, had watched Monsters and Mazes or something like that. And they thought, you know what, this is kind of Satan, and it's going to cause our kids to be suicidal and dangerous or whatever, get into the occult. They didn't want them playing D&D. And so these boys, slick as they were, decided they were going to make their own role-playing game called Warriors of Virtue, because that sounds very good, right? That sounds very virtuous. It's in the name, Warriors of Virtue. And all they did was they just stole everything from D&D. All the races and classes pretty much were the same. They might have put in something. I think there was a dragoon or something in there. All right. That was a guy who threw. That's what I was when I first played. And they actually printed up their own books. They had these huge, thick books bound, at a printer, local printer. They printed them off, and when you actually began to read it, I was like, oh, this is all new. And I was reading it. And then I started like really noticing some similarities, the horseshoes of the Zephyr. I felt like that was in the D&D. And then, you realize that these boys basically just took everything, tweaked it just a little bit, reflavored it, gave it a different name, and then put it in their book. And so it was really kind of like D&D, but that's what I started off. I started off as, I think, a Dragoon, what is a Dragoon again, Adam?
In that game, they throw things. I don't know the history of that, but that was how it worked for that. Yeah, you throw daggers, throw axes, throw whatever.
I was throwing shuriken. And,
that's right.
We all know shuriken do a ton of damage, right? But I started off with that as my theme, and I was this guy who, had been in a circus, and I had this big, horse tattoo going up my neck or something, and my name was La Muerte, the death. And I ended up getting, more and more powerful with these shuriken, and they really did get powerful by the end of it. I was like throwing these shuriken and doing amazing damage with each one. I'm like, which is satisfying. But that was my first experience. And again, like I said last week, in my mind, I had this vision of what a true D&D person, a guy who played role-playing games, was kind of antisocial, didn't really fit in, not somebody you would like hang out with a lot. But then I liked all these guys, and they weren't like that. And they were, okay, so the uniqueness, I think that stereotype is way overdone. I think most people I've met who have played D&D have been pretty interesting and creative people. And no, it's not all that. We all have had the experience where you walk into a game store and the smell of body odor is strong, and there's people sitting there playing games. And that doesn't mean that everybody plays in a game store is that. But I think that lends to that stereotype. Fortunately for me, none of these guys seem to be that to me. They all seem to be people who could function in normal society, and people wouldn't look sideways. As a matter of fact, people kind of look sideways when they first hear you play an RPG or D&D. If you say D&D rather than RPG, that always makes people stop and look at you, although it's gotten more acceptable, I think, in recent years. So I started with, we were playing Warriors of Virtue, and we ended up moving that to my house. I was a single guy at the time, and we would come over on Thursday nights and start around 5, I think, maybe even 4 sometimes. And we would play till 5 in the morning. When that started getting light outside and the birds started chirping, we would get so angry at those birds because we knew it meant the next day was trash for us. We were just going to be so tired. And yet we did it every week. Yep. And it was a good time. And we did that for a while. And then we had a friend come in and said, hey, guys, I think this was Barry Hudak. He came in and he said, hey, have you guys ever played D&D? And we're all like, Warriors of Virtue, man. Warriors of Virtue. But he brought D&D, and we gave it a shot. I think that was 3.5 when we started that. And there were more books and more stuff. And, I know that D&D went through some iterations, 3.5 to Pathfinder to 4.0 to 5.0, which is where it's at now. And at 4.0, I feel, this is my personal opinion, I feel like it got stupid because they tried to simplify it too much, and all the characters ended up feeling the same. Everybody had this same thing that would give them +2, or this thing that would give -2, and everything was +2 and -2, and it was stupid. I'm just throwing that out there. If you love 4.0, I'm sorry. 5.0, they did better, but they went in the direction of making it easier for people by taking away some of like the massive just amounts of stuff you could do. I like that massive amount of customization that you could really kind of hone in on a character and hone in on stuff. And Pathfinder is kind of the sweet spot for me. So at some point, it came to a place where I decided to run a game, and I ran 3.5 first. I did my first big campaign. It's called Oracle of Order, and it was about this huge prophecy that ended up kind of inside the mind of a mad emperor or king. I can't even remember what his title was, but and it was his right-hand man, the wizard, who had kind of set everything up, and you were in his mind fighting, at the end, and It was crazy.
Yeah.
That one, I think I ran 3.5, and that was a fun long campaign. I think it was like a year long, and we got almost the 20th, if not the 20th level. I don't remember. Do you remember where you were when we stopped?
I think we were 20 by the end of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of decided that's what I wanted to do. And I'm going to tell you something about me. And this is something, as you guys are thinking about how you're going to GM, again, you get to be the GM. And for me, the most important thing was a good story and a good time and memorable moments. I wanted the guys at the table to be laughing sometimes. I wanted them to like remember this fight and that, and how I was so amazing, and oh, how I got knocked down and almost died that time. And so less for me was it about the strict rules. That sounds kind of bad. I'll clarify that more. I would be what you call high fantasy player, high magic, not magic. I gave lots of stuff. So by the time they were at the end, they had, relics, and they were, extra feats, and they were just like really powerful people. But that's what it is. You want to play, you want to feel like you're something. You don't want to feel like that bard getting killed by a bush the whole time you play. And so maybe that's what colored the way I GM. I got killed by a bush in my first experience. And I'm like, never again. Never will my characters be killed by a bush, because they'll be gods among men. But we went. I decided I wanted to go to 20th level, and I let them have lots of stuff. But I felt free to scale up my monsters. Just because they were at 13th level didn't mean I had to make my CRs 13th level, because I made them so powerful. These monsters would be even more powerful, and it was a good time.
Yeah.
Did that. Then we went to Pathfinder, and I don't remember exactly what caused that shift.
Right.
I think it was because Pathfinder had the SRD online, the PFSRD. Everything was free.
Yeah.
Free matters. When you're a college student or shortly out of college, and you just don't have a lot of money, you can't be buying all those big books that cost $30 a piece. My goodness. And then just more and more, Wizards of the Coast at that time were just printing so many books. And so I think that's why we went to Pathfinder, and I ran the rest of the campaigns. I actually still run Pathfinder. So we're going to find on this podcast that there are a lot of different types of games out there. Adam has played more. I recently met a guy named Royal who has played even more than I think either of us have ever played. All these different kinds of systems. We had a friend named Evan who constantly was introducing us to new game systems and new games, and it was really cool. But mostly for me, it's been Pathfinder, D&D based stuff. Now I've gotten a little bit into playing some of the other systems, but for what I've run, it's been the fantasy aspect, and it's been Pathfinder. So I ran one called Blood of Kings, and it was kind of set on this world that had 9 moons and these permanent gates set up that you go to the moons. And the cool thing about that was it gave me the opportunity to really have some unique environments, because these moons just all had different aspects about them that were different than the world. And so that was really cool. I didn't get to go very far in that one, and it ended. And now I'm doing one called The Dormant Mind, and that one's ongoing. It's ongoing like in its 4th or 5th year, but that doesn't mean that I've been running it continuously that whole time. We take breaks like I talked about last week. So that is also Pathfinder. And again, I'm that guy who liberally gives powerful things to people, and I search for ways to kind of showcase my different players. That's like my favorite thing, is to like make it enjoyable for people, because it's great stories. And I want everybody to feel that. I don't want anybody to feel like they're the bard getting killed by the bush. And it's hard sometimes, because you get a group. I think in this Dormant Mind, when we started, we have a player called Kairos, who was our healer. But I always was trying to like find ways to help him be stronger, because like we'd get into battle, and we have a guy named Nightclaw in there who is like just powerful, and he would like hit people and like damage like crazy. And then Kairos would go up to hit, and he would miss. And if he did hit, it'd be like 2 damage, and he just wasn't powerful. But of course, he's a healer. And so I was constantly trying to find ways to to like work into the story ways for him to get stronger, to be part of that party. Cause you don't want a party so imbalanced that this guy will kill everybody with one hit. And this guy will be killed by anybody who touches him. You know, he's the bard with the bush. Yeah. And so, he wasn't a bard, he was a healer. But the nice thing was they all like found roles, and it's that balance of keeping everybody like strong in an area. They don't all have to be like fighters. Like I don't think Kyrus is ever going to be, well, I take that back. You know, he was a healer. And so if he was against undead, he could do some massive damage against undead. And he, of course, did some pretty epic scenes with some dust of dryness and stuff like that. But all that to suffice to say, I really enjoy that aspect. And if you're a GM, you know, you have to think about what it is that you derive enjoyment from. And for me, it is showcasing people and telling good stories and making everybody feel epic at times. And then at times, everybody fear for their life. That's also part of my joy. Make you fear for your life. But yeah, so I think that kind of is the path that I've taken as far as going through my gaming process. I don't know. Are there any questions, Adam, that you could ask that maybe our viewers would ask me if they were hearing this?
Yeah. One of the ones that kind of came to my mind, kind of pulling back to you as a player, do you have themes or maybe classes or those kind of things that you tend to like lean into more? I know for me, I have a lot of common tropes that seem to happen regardless of who I play. So do you have any of that kind of a thing?
Yeah. And this is something to pay attention to as a player, if you're a player watching this, or as a GM, as you have your players in there, to know the kinds of things that you love and to realize that that's not everybody. Everybody is not going to love what you love. And that's important as a GM, that you're not trying to kind of force your players into your role. Yeah. My role, it's easy. I want guys who move a lot. So I would have characters that could either teleport a lot, or they had like great fly speeds, or, you know, whatever it was. They could be all over the board, and they had some pretty powerful hits. Now they're not the most, you know, tanks. They're not going to be able to absorb tons of damage, but they're so mobile that they might not ever hardly get hit. Now that's the guy I play. They're also not the most powerful wizards, but they might know a little bit. You know, they might have like one or two spells they use, maybe. So yeah, I've played like, I can't even think of what these things were. What was the guy with the fairies? He was a
warlock.
A warlock, yeah. So he had a little bit of magic, you know, pretty small spectrum, but used it a lot, and it was powerful. You know, the hits he did. Rogues, any kind of striker. That's been me. I'm not the super powerful wizard. I'm not the tank. I'm not the healer. That would bore me to death. Some guys love it. And that's the thing I have to keep in mind as a GM. Somebody who, Evan, one of our guys that we play with often, he was constantly a character that was helping other people. His whole thing was, how can I buff you and get this situation good? So he would control the battleground and buff people. And that was really great for all of us. And he enjoyed it. That would be hard for me as a player to have that as my role all the time. And so it's always interesting for me to take a moment and think, my players, what is it that makes them tick? Yeah. Because you remember when I said I was trying to make our healer like more powerful? That wasn't what he was after. And I had to realize that what he was after was different than what Nightclaw was after, than what Ragnar was after, what, you know, all of our different players play differently. Now, Adam's characters, and you'll learn about him next week, so I won't get into that too much, but I feel like his are more varied, and he may not agree with that, but like mine are pretty much in the mold of mobile, heavy strike, and that's about it. By the way, I don't think I'm alone in saying charisma is always my dump stat. Never have I played a character who is like the talker, the one who's going to like persuade people. And the problem is I'm a natural talker myself, so it's hard not to do that in the game. You know, like I come in and I'm like want to control the talking and the situation and persuade people, but then I'm like, oh yeah, my charisma is like -2 mod. And so I look like some sort of, you know, weird person that nobody wants to be around, and I don't know how to talk to people, and I got to play that. So charisma is always my dump stat. My good stats are almost always dex and intelligence. I don't usually go for the strength guy. I don't go for the constitution guy. I don't go for the wisdom guy, except for when I'm playing a monk, which are also pretty awesome, by the way. Yeah. So that's kind of my typical characters. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but that's
for sure.
That's me.
Yeah, that was great. I think I wonder if we can look back at your death as a bard by the hands of a bush, leading to dump statting charisma.
Dump statting charisma, never playing a bard again, ever. Yeah, I think so much can be said for the first time you play, and how that, and truthfully, I when a player the first time they play loves their character, it's really hard for them to decide to go to another character and then ever feel like that character measures up to their first character. Right. And maybe as a players out there watching this, you can relate to that. You know, man, that character I played first was awesome. Or in my case, the bard, I'll never play that character again.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I know we're gonna, you know, this kind of stuff's gonna come out as we talk over the course of this podcast, and but I wanted to kind of, you know, really kick that off with just letting people know a little bit from our backstory. So appreciate you
I think
sharing.
it's good for you guys to know us, and I'm excited for you next week to get to know Adam, because he's done this more than me, and he has more varied experience. He was my introduction into the real RPG, not the bard getting killed by the bush where the guy didn't know what he was doing as a GM. And that's why it's important to know what you're doing as a GM. It's important to kind of understand it's not about winning yourself. I think that's where our GM at that time failed. He wanted to be powerful. He killed the whole party with a bush, and then we hated it for years. And it wasn't until later that I got back into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Well, hey, let's go ahead to our, every week we like to do a thing where we, you know, sometimes you're in a game and you just need a character. And so there's this book, again, by Gnome Stew or Gnomecast. They have both of those names, called Masks. And it's 1,000 different NPCs, and they just give you like a quick synopsis, a little bit about them. I'm going to have Adam kind of share one with us, and then we'll talk about what we might do with a character like that in a game we would play.
Yeah. So this is Ursula Batal, titled The Bitter Sculptor. I'm going to save the line here, but the appearance, she wears a simple tunic stained from working with clay. She's utterly ordinary in physique and facial features, and is neither ugly nor pretty. She always carries a small amount of clay to work with. As far as the role playing, they suggest that she tends to avoid eye contact and mutters to herself. Her hands are always busy molding a small piece of clay into various shapes. She will occasionally fall into fits of rage, which, while rare, are frightening and explosive. Her personality, Ursula is forever frustrated by her lack of social skills, but she also despises others for not suffering as she does. Her motivation is that she wants to be recognized as a great sculptor by her peers.
Feeling spurned because no one has recognized her.
Mm-hmm. And then her background, Ursula has wallowed in mediocrity her whole life and has never made an impression on anyone. She hoped that one day her sculptures would be her voice, but even they are ordinary and dull compared to what others produce. Desperately tired of being common, Ursula sought out and employed the use of magical clay said to bring an artist's vision to life. The recent reports of creatures made of clay attacking people must be mere coincidence. So her kind of statement that they put with this is, you really don't like this piece? I guess I could improve upon it. Or maybe you were just blind. What? Oh, I said that your knowledge of art is very fine. So kind of passive a little bit there, but angry also. So yeah, as you're hearing that, this kind of info about Ursula Batal, kind of what came to mind there, Matthew.
Okay, so last week You said, I think we had the evil alchemist, right?
Yeah.
You said, "Oh, he reminds me of the guy from Office Space, you know, the dude who's like, that's my stapler," and you know, surprisingly, that's the kind of person I think of with this. So, what's hard about this character is it's one of those. She's not pretty, she's not ugly, she's just kind of really ordinary. Well, that's hard to do.
Right.
So many times as I'm making a character, what makes them memorable is that they're extravagant in some sense. Whether they talk like this and so people remember, or it's some lady who, you know, and like in this one, like I wouldn't do any of those voices because that's too much. Because her whole thing was, her whole life she's never made an impression on anyone. So,
right. Yeah.
So you got to play a character like that. So when I'm doing someone like this, it comes down to not so much the voice and the extravagance as it comes to the little things they do with their hands. So they talked about playing with clay. I would actually bring in some Play-Doh or what's that stuff you would press in the newspaper and peel it up? Silly putty.
Oh yeah.
I would probably bring in like a little thing of silly putty and just sit there every time I'm her and just be squishing it around in my hands and talking. And then I would probably, you know, like be this mannerism of kind of constantly pushing my hair behind my ear, you know, trying to get into a female state of mind here, and looking down a lot. But at the same time, she has this kind of feeling like upset at people because she's never been recognized. And I love this kind of mumbling. And then when people kind of ask her what she said, she changes it to something, you know?
Right.
So there's these monsters that are around. Right. And, you know, so maybe she's like, oh yeah, I don't know. I've seen all these monsters that kind of made me think making these sculptures, but you know, I know they don't meet up to your expectations. I mean, I know that can be a great cause of adventures, vexations, you know, something where she always has that like line that kind of rhymes with what she really feels. And so I would probably like try and make a few of those before I go into the session. So maybe four sets of those, something that I would have her say really quiet and then like immediately say louder, this thing that seems more positive. I think that would begin to get her character across. But I don't know. Those are some of the things that I would think about. Again, it's so hard for me because my natural tendency is to make all of these characters a little bit over the top. And so to have a character that's very gray, very not noticeable, not extraordinary, for me has to go into mannerisms. But
for sure.
I don't know. What were you thinking?
Yeah, those kind of things, you know, very body posture at the table, you know, and I think that's again, this is any character we're playing, whether it's as a DM or GM, run an NPC, or you know, even the difference in like the PCs that we play if we're on the player side of the table. I think that's really important. I maybe am getting a little bit into my talk next week, but like currently where I'm at in Matthew's campaign is I have a character who actually is 4 different characters depending on what I roll on a dice when I wake up in the morning, you know, kind of thing. And it's been super fun, sometimes taxing if we have a lot of sleeps, because it's like, oh, I'm like, who am I today? You know, kind of thing, which actually I think plays into that. But posture, even as a player, I have to like pay attention to that in that realm of like, okay, am I the little halfling, or am I the kind of like very interior oriented sorcerer, or am I the more like bold gunslinger, you know, kind of thing, like, and those play. And we're doing that with the GM role, you know, in anybody we're running. So yeah, I hear that for sure, what you're saying as far as mannerisms and body posture. I do think like the kind of explosion of anger is like that would be a thing that would go from like, you know, 0 to 60 for her. Like, oh, like something's going on the inside here that we're not seeing.
And that can be the place where the extravagance comes out.
Yeah.
To be this person who's always like this, but then they turn around and they're like, but he's so-and-so, and then, then realizes I've just exposed myself, and then back into the shell.
Yeah. Another thing, like, and this could like lead them, maybe it'd be a red herring in some ways, but I almost wonder pushing into that, like nobody, what was the exact word? Utterly ordinary. She, I lost it here.
First line of the background, never made an impression on anyone.
Never made an impression on anyone. Of almost saying, if, maybe they've, for whatever reason, they've went in to maybe question her, like, there's these clay creatures. You work with clay. What do you know about this kind of thing? And even if the party is leaving where she's at, as a GM, kind of even saying, you realize you just had a conversation, but even that conversation is somewhat even wiped from your brain as you leave this place, which could lead them to think, is there something magical going on where, but it's
I think
more
that would
about
definitely make them think something more important is happening
yeah.
here.
And maybe that's, again, we talked about like, this doesn't have to turn into an encounter, but that may be a deeper thing even with her of like, what if the reason that she is so mediocre is because someone cursed her a long time ago to be invisible to everyone, kind of like it could be just natural, but what if there's something even deeper there? And if they are like, oh, okay, cool, and they just move on, well, that hook didn't land, but maybe it goes somewhere. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking aloud here as I go through that. But I do think something of even like, you don't even remember what like color her hair was as you leave this place because she's so just not making an impression on you. Yeah. So I do think saying that, but the mannerisms thing for sure. As far as like, looking at this, if you were going to make use of a character like this, what would be kind of the reasoning? Would it be just kind of a random, like, oh, we're going to put this person in this place? Or do you feel like you would have some kind of lead in to using someone like Ursula?
It's tougher because this one's so hard not to like want to hook into that. She's making clay things and clay things are attacking, which then becomes like a hook for an encounter, as well as an NPC. So not always when you need an NPC do you need them hooking to a new encounter.
Right.
Sometimes you're in the middle of an encounter. This one I think is one that takes a little more, and maybe this is just for me, it takes a little more expertise. It's almost easier to be like the really stereotypical over the top things. It's a little harder to be like this kind of understated person without just seeming like you're not really invested in the character.
Right.
So that'll take a little more work for you, especially if you're not like a really loud. So for me, someone who is so like gregarious with my gestures and my voice, if I suddenly get real small, my players are going to notice that, and that's going to stick out to them. But if you're already kind of like you have a harder time like being that like actor, they may not even notice that you're doing mannerisms. If you're trying to be like really understated, you may just feel like yourself. And so that's something to think about. But if I had to use someone like this in a campaign, I think this would be it would be hard for me to use someone like this without it becoming so noticeable that it becomes a hook. So yeah, I don't know that this would be the kind of person I'd be like, oh, I need a quick person. I'm just going to grab this, the bitter artist, the bitter sculptor, unless I didn't put the part in about like there's clay monsters attacking. Maybe it's like I use her and she's kind of constantly pleading for or kind of begging for compliments and can't seem to get them. And that's just the character that they encounter when they come to this town. And again, I would have to leave out the part about there being clay monsters if, in fact, I didn't want them to go on that side excursion.
Yeah. I'm leaning into the encounter, but I like the idea of the clay monsters being the initial reason. It's like, oh, there's these clay monsters. Well, there's a clay artist in town. Maybe I'm putting things into their heads.
Why they would visit her in the first place.
They would even visit her in the first place. And, it definitely, it's giving you the option in that prompt, but it's not saying for sure she's the problem. It really could be coincidence. She has this magic clay. I almost think of like magic beans. She's been duped to think like, oh yeah, this is going to do something for me. But really, there's this other thing happening over here. The reason that these creatures are coming, she may be a patsy. She may be just have been duped. It may be wrong place, wrong time, or maybe she is that. But again, this isn't necessarily about encounters, but it really is hard to not go there. So
yeah, and if you're making her the patsy, maybe there is another person that you want them to kind of focus on.
Yeah.
And it could be that idea that like someone came along and gave her this clay and said, listen, you use this, you'll go far. Don't worry. Things will pick up.
Yeah.
And she's like fighting this inner war of wanting acknowledgement and realizing that this has been the most anybody's wanted to talk to her. But at the same time, they destroyed part of her family's business or something.
Right.
These clay monsters. Right. And so she really wants the accolades, but at the same time realizes it's not right. And then they come to find out that this was given to him by X. And he is the person that you're going to go after.
Yeah, for sure. This is random, and I can't remember the exact like motivations, but I'm thinking like a Little Shop of Horrors situation could happen with this too, of like, and I have no idea. I can't remember why the plant becomes a thing in that show or the movie or the play or anything, but how it's like, it grows and grows and it gets out of hand. And then it's like, oh no, these things, like this plant is more powerful than I am. And how do I get away, out of this thing?
Right.
Or they're like clay creatures. It's like, I formed these things, but like now control. They have their own, agenda and I can't, get away from that. So again, that's maybe broadening it out too much, but I think she could be interesting, but going back to that, it's all about like presentation at the table. Whereas like sometimes the voicings or just like the intensity can get across things. This one's more understated and a little more specific, I guess. So,
So that's an NPC that maybe you guys would want to use in your campaign. Maybe that speaks to you. Hopefully. Hey, we're going to wrap up here in a little bit, but before we do, every week we talk to you guys that we have a place for you to leave questions or comments about things you would love us to talk about or questions you have. It's called the Haversack, and you can go to riseofthegm@gmail.com and leave us something for that. You can follow us on Instagram at Rise of the GM Podcast or at Rise of the GM on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call that now. Easy ways to find us and leave feedback. And we actually have had someone ask or leave a comment for us or ask a question or something. Adam, what was that this week?
Yeah. So this came through our Gmail. Again, you can ask questions through that way. And we'd love to answer them if we can, or look up things if we need to. But this is from Wadaya Hotel 98. Says,
98. What a year.
Dear Matthew and Adam, I enjoyed the first episode and appreciated you sharing your GM philosophies as well as more great resources for aspiring GMs like myself. Although I did have a question for both of you.
All right, let's hear it.
This is the first question. How do you feel about fudging roles as a GM? I've known some GMs that abide by the rules of cool and others that say that the die should always decide. Where do both of you fall? I know I always feel a little hesitant to inflict too much pain on my players, but I also know that stakes are what makes a good story. What do you think is too little or too much when it comes to this concept?
All right. Do you want to start with that one?
Fudging dice. I feel like I've been all over with that. I would say the majority of my GM career, maybe half of my GM career now, but really was concerned about not killing people. Like that was like a massive concern every time. It was like, I don't want to kill people. I don't want to like make them lose their characters. Again, maybe that comes from history that I'm going to talk about next week, but like that kind of thing, being worried about that. So I would use a GM screen a lot, during that time. And I've fudged rolls, where it's like, man, like somehow I've crit this person like 6 times tonight. How is this happening? Like, I'm going to just not, that's a miss, kind of thing. I've done that before, more early on though. But I will say, like, lately, because we have online played so much more, it was always at the table. We've online played, and there are ways to make GM rolls, but and sometimes somehow I get clicked on my GM, like hide from everybody else rolls, and I can't get away from it. It's like, why is this still rolling just to me? But I feel like that has opened up some things as far as I don't really fudge rolls. I haven't fudged rolls in a long time, because more, it's just like shown to everybody, kind of thing, more so than even like a philosophy thought. So I don't know. I'm kind of back and forth. Like, for some reason, 5e for me, I'm less worried about doing like hard hits on people. I think it may be the death saving throws give some availability for there to be like cool moments of like bringing people back up. I don't know, but yeah, I tend to not fudge dice, but if there was like a really good reason, and that reason I think for me would be just dice are like either not doing anything for me, like I'm rolling like 1s and 2s all night long on a D20. I may be willing to be like, no, that one hits, just to like something to happen. Or if it's like, man, I am just like, my dice are hot tonight and I'm going to kill these people. But I'd say for the most part, I'm like, I'm just going to let the dice roll where they are. So what about you?
So when I would first question, should I fudge? Here's the reasons, the 2 reasons. One, you mentioned, I end up rolling like 6 criticals in a roll against them. And I'm like, man, I'm just, and I would question that. The other one would be, is if I'm rolling all 1s or like super low and I'm missing all the time. And I'm afraid, okay, they're going to kill these guys really fast. And then that's not very exciting. I actually choose to not fudge rolls, but instead to tell the story epically. Okay. So this goes back to kind of my GM-ness is storytelling. And so rolling out in the open, and this is what you do for us. A lot of times you're like, I want you to see, I'm not trying to do anything here. They've got to have this, and then roll it. And everybody sees it once if it came over that, and they know that that's the dice. And sometimes the dice roll hot. The thing there is, as the GM, you've got to make them feel like this thing got so lucky, or had so much power that it was just like crazy. And you got to tell their death well if they die.
Yeah. Right.
Make that a sad moment. Make it like a moment of unbelievable, how did this happen? And then you also have to have like, what's going to happen next kind of lined up. Right. And that's the hard part. You don't want to kill somebody and then just everybody be sitting there stunned and everybody feel like quitting the game. That's not what you want. You got to somehow guide that story. And so I actually killed Adam's character in my current campaign, but luckily it was like at the high point end of a night, I think. And then I got with Adam and I said, all right, you can just roll up a new character, but we talked together, and I don't remember who came up with the idea, but he had this. So he went into a temple of tears, and there was this everlasting fire that was trapped in this temple that couldn't die, but also could not feel anything because it was trapped in this. And so it wanted to make a bargain with somebody, and it made a bargain with his character that it would go into them. But then the problem would be that sometimes it's the only way this flame could experience feeling anything anymore, because it no longer was embodied. And it wanted that. And so it kind of constantly was urging him a 20% roll on a D100, that it would encourage him to do something foolish just so it could feel something, it could experience that. And at the same time, it had penalties on it. So he was sterilized, no longer could have kids. He had this 20% fail chance to actually do something he wouldn't have normally done, all that. And this thing had been around for a while. And every time it would be in a person that died, it would end up back at this Temple of Tears until another person came along and made this agreement to accept it into their body. Now, it gave him benefits too. He was like immune to fire, and I forget what all it gave him. It gave him some stuff, which is why he made the bargain in the first place. But because of that, and because it had several lives in it, we could work out a way where, as his character died, the people who had been in this flame then began to surface in its place. And they don't know exactly what changed just so that it didn't go back to the Temple of Tears, but that all was woven into my story some, and gave him a chance to be something that was cool now beyond this death. And so, there had to be some work put in as a GM to make that so that it wasn't just like, okay, your character is dead. Well, roll up another 7th level character or whatever level we were at the time, and just go from there, which is not as fun. But sometimes people are so discouraged. They're already like thinking, I already have a cleric rolled up, and you're like, you don't want that to be the case. The other side of that is, if I'm rolling completely horrible and I feel like it's not going to be a challenge to my people, they're in there and they're just beating the socks off of this like ancient red dragon because he's rolling all ones, and it's like, that's not right. I, as a GM, feel absolutely nothing bad in me about the fact that I just on the spot give this dragon way more health. So they're like killing it. Normally they would have killed it by now. But I decide he has more health than that. And he's going to stick around longer to give myself some time to get some dangerous rolls in there. So I would rather fudge my, the health of this monster, the way that it lives beyond, something like that, than to fudge the rolls. I think it's exciting for me to roll out there and for them to see, it's a 1, he missed. And then to tell that story well too. This thing went to do something amazingly bad to you, and it would have hurt. But, and then my creative mind has to come up with what happened for that but. Sure. But this, and he missed and ended up falling into the fire himself, and lost one of his limbs, and now he's flying around with 3 limbs and squirting blood, and okay, that begins to become a memorable moment. And then dang, he rolled another 1. As he's flying, his left wing catches on a stalactite and rips, and now he is no longer able to fly, but he's still trying to half flutter around, and there's still blood squirting out here, but surprisingly he's not dead, and those terrifying claws come at you again, and again, it's got to be the story. So I would say fudging rolls, what the worst thing is if a character begins to suspect that you're rolling behind the screen and either hitting them when you shouldn't, or not like really taking, like when you would roll a 1, fudging that. Like if they get the sense that you're fudging, they feel like nothing matters.
Right.
And so that's why I think rolling it out in front is better for everybody. But then you got to be a good storyteller as a GM. So that's the way I would lean. Not everybody, and that's not the only way. Sometimes somebody could make a great argument for, I'm going to roll behind the screen, and I still make it sound exciting, and I don't let them know that I fudge that roll, and go from there. That's where you as a GM get to decide. But me, I'm for the storytelling of the horrendously bad and the horrendously bad. And that sounds weird, but like when it's bad for the PCs or when it's bad for my monster. I think sometimes the most memorable things happen when there's crits in one way or the other, crit fail or crit succeed. Amazing things can happen. And when a character dies, you just got to make it worth it. You just got to make it like memorable and important and solemn. And then you got to think of a creative way to continue, because that player is not going to quit playing for the rest of the session. You want that player in there.
Yeah.
They may have to come up with a new character. How are you going to do that? And that can be as much fun sometimes as if they would have like gotten the fudge win. Maybe that's not even very memorable for them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think to like wrap up my thought with that, I'm in the same, more and more in that same camp. And the more important the role, definitely the less likely I am to fudge it.
Right.
You know, it's like, okay, this is your last death saving throw. And if I be last death saving throw, there's no way I'm going to roll that behind the screen, because no matter what happens, it's like, oh, you killed me or you saved me. It's like you said, things don't feel as worth it, even if you didn't fudge it. The only argument I think, like, and this isn't really about fudging anymore, this is about like the behind the screen or secret rolling. Maybe not only argument, but an argument that comes to mind for me is that sometimes people have a tendency to metagame, and you know, it's like, if I roll everything behind the screen, you don't know that this ogre has a +8 to hit, you know, so you can't start saying, well, okay, I'm gonna use this ability that's going to bring me up so that I'm never going to, you know, like, you can make that decision, right. but we start sometimes crunching numbers or things, and it's like not as fluid. But I think the fix to that is for people to do the best they can to not meta game in the middle of it, you know.
I actually absolutely love that line of reasoning. I don't want people to like zero in right away on what number is it? What are they hitting at?
Yeah.
What do they have to get? Because that'll influence, like, if they decide to go after, if they know that person has to get a 17 or higher to even hit them, they become very reckless sometimes, or they do things they wouldn't normally do if they don't know. So I will, you know, roll behind something or screen until it's like, okay, this is like a big deal, guys. I'm rolling this in front of you, so everybody knows. You know, boom. You know, especially once they've figured it out, because players do.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so looks like he has to get at least a 12 to hit me. You know, I try not to say those, but they'll figure that out if you're not careful. The other thing I would add to this conversation is this: as a GM, put some forethought into death. So when I GM'd, I'll get it right here in a minute. When I ran the campaign Oracle of Order, I started off, I didn't know how good of a GM I would be. I didn't want to kill everybody with the bush in the first episode. So very, very first thing that happened was they got a little box with, I think there were 5 players, with 5 Philosopher Stones in it. One of the things a Philosopher Stone can do is resurrect, right? I think that was, I kind of looked into it because I wanted each of them to have like one get out of jail free card. I made a stupid mistake. I threw Adam once, you know, he stepped in that campaign. He had this Vorpal sword and he threw it, but he threw it at a guy that had this magic on him that whatever you did to him would do the same damage to you. So he actually rolled a crit succeed, a 20. Throwing this Vorpal sword, cut the guy's head off, and then immediately his head pops off and he falls down dead. That's just the way it was. It was actually a really fun moment, but here he was dead. The nice thing was there was a Philosopher's Stone that could bring him back to life. Now, the thing is, there's not unlimited Philosopher's Stones, so they have to make decisions. And actually, Adam ended up using 2 of those Philosopher's Stones, and somebody else didn't get one because he was so reckless. But like a little forethought of, okay, is there like oh man, things got way worse than we expected. Here's our one get out of jail free card, but we don't want to spend it all the time because we're not going to get more. And you know that, you know, so that's, you know, and again, it doesn't have to be a Philosopher's Stone, but you may build in something that, you know, they have a patron who is a powerful wizard who has promised them one true resurrection spell. And that's, you know, all they're going to get. I don't know what you could do to build it into the story, but sometimes that can be enough that if things go crazy wrong, you gotta weigh out.
That's good. That's good. So his second, the second question, just to jump into that email again. I think this can be a little bit briefer here, but additionally, do you have any ideas for what you might want to call your listeners? Or do you know whether you want to do so at all? Some communities really get into naming conventions like that. Here are my list of ridiculous fan names.
Okay, let's hear them.
Got a handful of them here. The Risers, Ascending GMs, GM Nation, Dice Goblins, GM Squad, Arisen GMs. Sincerely, What a Yahotel 98. I'm probably saying that
pause
completely
before
wrong.
What a yada bada hoo.
I apologize for What a Yahotel 98. So sorry about that. So the Risers, Ascending GMs, GM Nation, Dice Goblins, GM Squad, Arisen GMs. I have not thought at all about that idea, I must say.
I hadn't either, but I think I like Ascending GMs.
Ascending GMs.
So if I'd say, hey, Ascending GMs, be sure and submit your questions and comments. You guys are all rising as GMs. You're getting better and stronger and coming more to your power. I like that one. What was it? What were the other ones? Ascending GMs and what else?
The Risers, GM Nation.
GM Nation, maybe not bad.
Dice Goblins. GM Squad.
That one almost feels like disrespectful. All right, all you Dice Goblins, get your stuff in here. Feels more like players to me, Dice Goblins, than GMs.
Maybe we should start calling our table that. GM Squad and Arisen GMs. Yeah, I think out of those, for me, Ascending GMs probably catches it, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to personally commit to any of that.
We're not going to christen you guys all Ascending GMs yet. We may use that terminology. I may use it today, but we may see what organically begins to come out of our mouths when we talk about our listeners as we go.
Be sure to follow us on social media, and there'll be a poll up this week asking these very things. I think it'd be good.
There you go. So all of you get a chance to kind of weigh in on what you think it would be good to call you guys.
Yeah.
So, all right. Hey, I think that's going to do it for us today. Be sure to get your questions in, all you Ascending GMs, to one of those places where you can get in touch with us. Rise of the GM. Listen to it, search for it. Join us next week. We'll talk about Adam.
Have a good one.